Recently, the news that China's $2 trillion in trade surplus has disappeared sparked concerns all over social media platforms. The problem was first exposed by famous Chinese economic analyst Lao Man. On 9th of February, he posted on Chinese social media Weibo that during the 3 years of zero COVID policy from 2020 to 2022, China's trade surplus would reach $1.8977 trillion, which is almost equivalent to the sum of surpluses over a decade, from 2010 to 2019. Furthermore, the surplus in 2022 reached $877.6 billion. However, such a vast surplus was not reflected in the data on foreign exchange reserves, nor in the data on foreign exchange accounts and commercial bank settlements. It was as if this amount had vanished into thin air. Theoretically, it is impossible to hide such a large sum of money, even within the global financial market. So where has this $2 trillion gone? Many netizens had their guesses, and Lao Man also responded to the speculations with facts and statistics. Generally speaking, trade surplus either becomes China's foreign exchange reserves or gets transferred into domestic banks. According to the data posted by Lao Man, at the central bank level, China's foreign exchange reserves were $3.1079 trillion in 2019 and $3.1277 trillion in 2022. So there wasn't a huge difference. The foreign exchange balance, that is, the base currency formed by the central bank's conversion of US dollars, was RMB 21.2317 trillion in 2019 and RMB 21.4712 trillion in 2022. Again, the difference is minimal. Additionally, he mentioned that some people say that nowadays companies don't like to sell foreign exchange, but rather keep it in their own accounts, so the money can be found in the data of commercial banks. However, the central bank also publishes data on commercial banks' foreign exchange deposits, which are the total foreign exchange deposits of the people and enterprises in the country, every month. In 2019, it was $760.4 billion, which increased to $996.9 billion in 2021, but surprisingly decreased to $854.9 billion in 2022. There was no significant change over the 3 years, which does not match the hundreds of billions of dollars in foreign exchange inflows. Does this mean the money is left stranded outside of the country? On February 11th, Lao Man continued to post data showing that fundamental source of China's foreign exchange surplus, the foreign trade surplus. He showed figures from 2022 Chinese customs statistics, which revealed the surplus was created by 3 major types of enterprises. The surplus of private enterprises was $1,132.2 billion. The surplus of foreign invested enterprises with Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan was $170.3 billion, and a deficit of state-owned enterprises $447.6 billion. The reason for the deficit is that state-owned enterprises monopolize the import of most commodities, including oil, iron ore, coal, and food. With almost no export capacity in state-owned industrial enterprises, they have been playing a pure deficit role. He spoke of the strict restrictions imposed by the Chinese Communist Party's Foreign Affairs Bureau on foreign trade settlements, where payments are not allowed to remain outside of the country for long periods. They especially target private enterprises, which are the main foreign exchange generators. He continued to question how the surplus of more than $1 trillion generated by private enterprise in 2022 alone has now inexplicably disappeared. Some speculate that the money is in Hong Kong. However, Lao Man explained that the foreign exchange funds in the Hong Kong financial system have not increased in the past 3 years. Some people also speculated that they may have bought gold, but Lao Man responded that buying gold is counted as an import and has already been deducted when calculating the trade surplus data. Others speculate that China had used the money to repay its foreign debts, but figures show that foreign debts had only reduced slightly. Then perhaps it's the withdrawal of foreign capital in recent years? Lao Man responded that foreign capital leaving China would need to be settled in foreign exchange, and currently the data on foreign exchange transactions of banks is basically balanced. So that can't be the reason. Also, China has a small foreign investment, so it practically has a negligible impact. Some also speculate that the Chinese Communist Party's foreign trade figures are fake and that it is impossible to have such a large trade surplus. During the 3-year pandemic, the cost of raw materials increased significantly, and except for resource exporting countries, almost all industrial exporting countries had a trade deficit. China is a typical resource importing industrial exporting country, and its production capacity was unstable due to the strict zero-COVID policy. For China to have such a huge trade surplus seems a bit unrealistic, to the extent it sounds more like exaggeration. Lao Man did not give an answer as to where the money would have gone, but the information he provided was shocking enough and caused a heated discussion among internet users, and very quickly, Lao Man was banned by Weibo. But on Twitter, the netizens were much more outspoken and believed that the money had gone into the pockets of the senior Communist Party officials. A comment states, "I'll let you in on a big secret. It's not that China's foreign exchange reserves haven't changed in the last 3 years. In fact, since 2011, it hasn't changed much in the last 12 years. Where has the surplus gone in the past decade? Definitely hidden in Swiss banks." Some media commentators have also suggested that the only explanation for the missing 2 trillion is that the money has flowed out of China through unofficial channels. The Economist magazine estimated in 2012 that corrupt Chinese officials had laundered at least 1 trillion out of China in the past 20 years. Recently, a large number of Chinese billionaires have immigrated overseas, including family members of government officials. So could this huge amount of money have been funneled out of the country by corrupt officials and wealthy individuals? If so, another question arises. How did this money flow out of China under the tight control of the Chinese Communist Party? We have summarized the following methods. 1. Underground banks. There are a large number of underground banks in Hong Kong and China that would transfer assets for a handling fee of around 0.1%. For example, if an overseas friend needs RMB and I need US dollars, I would transfer RMB to him in China and he would transfer US dollars to me in the States. The movement of the RMB happens within China and the movement of foreign currency happens offshore. There is no actual physical movement taking place. On the surface, it appears there were no transactions. However, the exchange had already been completed. But using this approach requires the balancing and hedging of businesses in 2 countries, so any short-term differences need to be paid by underground banks, requiring them to have a high level of capital mobilization. In addition, many underground banks use virtual money for payments and purchases, making them even less transparent. 2. Having multiple accounts like ants moving homes. Taking advantage of China's policy of US $50,000 per year cross-border remittance by collecting or purchasing multiple identity cards to open accounts and remitting through these accounts. This method is like ants moving homes, foreign exchange evasion by splitting up, which was a common means of transferring assets in the past. However, regulatory authorities are aware of this method and have issued policies to banks asking them to be more vigilant with these possible splitting transactions and, if needed, reject the transactions. 3. Overseas card purchases of insurance. Some Chinese came up with the idea of spending foreign currency or foreign exchange through purchasing luxury goods. For example, they would agree with the merchant to purchase a Patek Philippe watch and refund it in a few days. The refund could be in the form of a foreign currency to their card or by check, but they would usually need to pay 5 to 10% refund handling fee to the merchant. Some rich people would also buy insurance overseas using US dollars and then cancel the policy within a 2-month cooling off period, with the refund going directly into their overseas accounts and thereby transferring their assets. 4. Modified POS machines. A so-called modified POS machine allows technology to change the location of the transaction. For example, if someone was using the card in Hong Kong or Macau, the system is deceived into thinking that the transaction is instead taking place in China. This not only saves the relatively expensive handling fees for overseas transactions, but it also avoids the foreign exchange controls in China because the system is tricked into thinking it is a local transaction happening in China. Cash in hand. The most primitive method would be through cash, that is, carrying cash when traveling across borders. One way would be to make multiple trips with a large number of people, and the other would be to smuggle it through special channels. However, these methods are more labor-intensive and have higher risks. Trade inflated prices. The siphoning of RMB out of the country through trade started in the 1990s. The simplest form is to open two companies, one based in China and the other based offshore, say in Hong Kong. For example, I would like my Hong Kong company to export my domestic goods worth US 100,000, selling them to Europe at US 200,000. The inflated US 100,000 will be retained in the Hong Kong offshore account. 7. Foreign currency loans secured by RMB assets. For example, Mr. Zhang invested in a project in the US and was willing to borrow US 100 million, guaranteeing his equity in his China-based company. The US bank approved Mr. Zhang's proposal and hence lent him US 100 million in the US. But to the dismay of the US bank, Mr. Zhang decides not to repay the USD loan, and the equity in his China-based company was given to the bank and dealt with as it saw fit. This isn't a fraudulent loan because the equity had been guaranteed to the bank, so he can't be sued. Mr. Zhang intended to leave the country regardless, so he didn't want his domestic assets anymore. This method is called overseas loans under domestic guarantees and has only become popular in the last few years, with several banks on Wall Street falling prey to this method. 8. Overseas asset acquisitions. For example, Wang Jianling, the former richest man in China, in 2017 purchased a large number of light asset industries overseas at high prices to achieve asset transfer. He acquired AMC Entertainment Holdings, AMC Theatres, and Legendary Entertainment, just to name a few. His overseas investments have accumulated to RMB 245.1 billion. Many people followed in Wang's footsteps. They only needed to purchase an overseas film company, and regardless of whether this company was a real one or a shell company, the money they invested will become their overseas assets. As a result, many light asset investments were halted and heavily fined, and Wang Jianling's overseas investments heavily monitored and controlled by Chinese authorities. 9. Intentionally losing a multinational lawsuit. A Seattle-based lawyer, Harris, published a blog post exposing a Chinese man who deliberately lost a multinational lawsuit in order to transfer his assets. The owner of a private Chinese manufacturer had asked Harris's law firm to help his China-based company deliberately lose a false breach of contract lawsuit, which required him to pay US 3.5 million to the US company. However, the US company in fact also belongs to this Chinese man. 10. Using virtual currencies such as Bitcoin to buy domestically and sell abroad. 11. Money laundering through gambling. For example, a corrupt official goes gambling in Macau or aboard a cruise ship. First, he would exchange the cash for chips, even for just the first round, and then he will be able to exchange the chips back for cash. The money has now become clean because he can claim that the money was won from gambling. 12. Establishing a company or foundation in a Pacific Island country. This is one of the most legal and simplest methods, and it is also the most commonly used method to set up a company or foundation in Hong Kong, Macau, or a Pacific Island country and take 100% ownership of the company in China as a corporate entity. This way, all the money earned in China can be legally transferred to its overseas parent company after paying taxes. For example, the Bahamas, Cayman Islands, and the British Virgin Islands are the most common locations. These three islands have a total of 1 million registered Chinese companies, including Tencent, Baidu, Ali, Jingdong, Xiaomi, Sina, NetEase, and many more.